Welcome to the Just for the Health of It podcast interviews with our local health experts. I'm your host, Drew Crawford, a public health educator here at Warren County Public Health. And today I'm excited to talk with Garrett Lloyd Lester, the coordinator of community and coalition initiatives at the Suicide Prevention Center of New York. Thank you so much for obviously coming on. And we have a lot of great things to talk about. And obviously one of our, one topic that I think a lot of people are talking about, mental health and obviously suicide prevention. But thank you so much for being on here and taking time out of your day.
Yeah, Drew, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk openly and directly about something that is, for many people, a scary topic, suicide, right?
Yeah.
But the hopeful thing about the topic is that anyone can play a potential role in helping keep someone with thoughts of suicide safe. So that's part of why we do the work that we do.
Absolutely. And Garrett, if you wanted to, could you introduce yourself? How long have you been in the role? Any of your credentials and any interesting facts about you?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I just recently surpassed my, let me see if I can do the math here properly, uh, 7th year at the Suicide Prevention Center of New York State. Prior to that, I had the good fortune of working in Cortland County with the mental health department for a number of years in a couple of different roles. And in another lifetime, I also worked in the field of developmental disabilities. So I've always been connected to health and human services in some way, shape, form, or another. And I have been doing this work for a good number of years, 30 plus. And but suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention is a large passion of mine. It's a calling. It's something that found me, and I found it in terms of a field. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of a larger team to help make an impact in New York State and hopefully in a broader range. Fun fact about me, my first name is Gara, which is a somewhat unique name. When I look at family genealogy, it goes back a few different generations. My son is the 5th Gara in a row. We affectionately refer to him as G5. And I've not ever seen that name as a first name outside of the family. So that's something that's, I don't know if it's fun, but it's certainly unique in terms of names.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've definitely emailed a lot of people, talked to a lot of people. I don't think I've ever had a Garrett before. So, that's definitely very, very interesting. And, obviously Cortland County, where you come from, they have a very, very big mental health facility, is very, very robust. Their mental health and their substance abuse, initiatives are second to none. We really like their opioid drop off syringe exchange or needle exchange boxes. Those things have been absolutely wonderful to see. But obviously, mental health is a very, very big topic, and it's a topic that's kind of coming up more and more as we're progressing through our years. A lot more people are talking about being mentally healthy and how health is not just about being absent of sickness, but also making sure that you're happy in your mind and you're happy with yourself and everything like that. And, with that, that can get a little harder during the winter. You're not as outside as much. You're not seeing as many people. The holidays are around the corner, and especially after COVID, a lot of people are missing certain people on holidays. So how do you, as somebody who works in the Suicide Prevention Center, how do you kind of navigate the winter months? How do you kind of navigate those holiday months where maybe somebody was there that's not there anymore? Maybe it's just, you're not around the same family anymore. How do you kind of navigate those winter months when you can't really get outside?
Sure. And I appreciate the question. I think that's really important because, part of suicide prevention, and oftentimes people think of suicide prevention as somebody who is moments away maybe from acting on thoughts. And certainly we want to be able to intervene at that place, right, to help someone stay safe from their thoughts of suicide. But we don't only want to wait until that point. We want to think about, to your point, being mentally healthy. And that can mean a lot of different things. And you're right, in upstate New York, typically, from say November until March, if we're lucky, we're going to have shorter days. It's going to get dark earlier. For those of us who might not be as active or whatnot, we might have challenges getting outdoors and enjoying the season, as it were. And so that can create some challenges for our mental health, right? Some people might be familiar with seasonal affect disorder, right? This idea that based on the shorter days, based on it getting darker earlier, based on the potential for snowfall to help keep us, sort of isolated, that can help impact our mental well-being. So just some high-level things to consider, right? One of which is, okay, the calendar is going to turn, and it's going to start to get colder if we live in upstate New York. So instead of waiting for those changes to happen, thinking about, okay, it's getting closer to winter, what can I do, right? So thinking ahead of time, especially if you know that you get impacted, right, during the winter months, what can I do that's different? How can I modify my routines? How can I make sure that even if I'm not visiting people in person, I'm staying connected? Because we know that connection is a huge protective factor for so many things with mental well-being, including suicide prevention, right? So if I tend to hibernate, as it were, in the wintertime, and I don't know that that's always helpful for me, then what should I do? What can I do differently? And start that planning again before the first snow starts to fall. Thinking about, you mentioned holidays, right? We know that the suicide rates do not rise during the holidays, that there still is this myth and misunderstanding that happens, but that's not the case. But that doesn't detract from the fact that, as you also referenced, right, for those of us who have had losses of any sort that are maybe either associated with the holidays or that much harder to challenge, think to ourselves, what do we need to do for ourselves to keep ourselves well if we're struggling with the loss of a loved one or a friend or a colleague, right? Does it mean that we go to more holiday parties? Does it mean that we maybe don't go to as many holiday parties, right? So it's really checking in part with ourselves. It starts with ourselves and in being reflective. And I think the other thing, just in broad strokes, is communicate with those in your life. Say, listen, you know what? I struggle sometimes in the winter. For whatever the conditions are, whatever's creating those conditions, communicate to those people in your life and say, if you notice me feeling down, if I seem quiet, whatever it might be, here's what you can do, or whatever. So take that approach too, right? Let people know how they can help you. Don't assume that people know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really big piece. I really love what you said about the whole connection piece, making sure that you're staying connected with people. That's a very, very big piece, especially in the winter when you can feel like you're not necessarily connected to anybody. You're kind of waking up in the dark, going to work in the dark, and then coming home in the dark. And it can feel like you're just constantly on the other side from everybody else. But I really love what you said about that connection piece. And again, also making sure that you check in with yourself, making sure that you kind of have that conversation with other people, check in with yourself and say, okay, here's how I'm feeling mentally right now. And, here are some of the steps that I can take to go to this direction. But I really, really like what you said about that whole connection piece and starting that conversation. And I think that's always a hard first step for a lot of people. So how do you
Mm-hmm.
suggest people start that conversation? How should somebody go up to somebody that they find relatively close to them and say, hey, listen, uh, I'm not feeling all mentally well. Here are some of the signs. Here are some of my symptoms. Here's how I react to it. And here's what you can
Mm-hmm.
do. How do you navigate that conversation?
Yeah, and I think there's two answers to that, and there's two perspectives. One is if I'm being self-reflective, if I know about myself that the winter months I tend to be more sluggish and again hibernate and I start to withdraw, but I also know that doesn't necessarily help my mental well-being. So if I know that about myself, um, I'm going to try to identify the people who I know are trusted friends and family members, right? Whether I'm an adolescent, whether I'm an older adult, who are the people in my circle, right? Who's my tribe? And to say, listen, you know what? You might notice in the wintertime, I tend to slow down. I'm not as connected, or so on and so forth. Um, and if this is factually true, and you say something like, and don't worry about me because this is just what I do. But you could also say, sometimes I get a little bit down. If you notice that, feel free to bring it to my attention. Call me on it. You are the person who gets to decide what you believe is going to be helpful for you, right? And to sort of drive that ship. Now, on the flip side of that, not everyone is self-reflective to that point where they even know that about themselves to initiate that conversation, right? They might know that they're not at the top of their game. They might know that they're being impacted. They may not know what it's about, or they may not feel comfortable starting that conversation. Doesn't change that they're being impacted, right? So the really important flip side of that conversation is, if I notice people in my life who I'm friends with and that I care about, and I've noticed a change, I want to feel empowered and confident to approach them in a caring fashion and say, hey, listen, you know what, Gara, I've noticed that ever since the time change and it's been gotten darker earlier, we don't see you out anymore. You're not doing the things that you used to do. I've noticed that. Are you okay? Is anything going on? Very simple, very straightforward, right? And I think it starts with noticing, right? And what a beautiful thing that is, right? For somebody who might not feel, in some instances, that they're worthy of notice. Wow, somebody noticed and then said, "Are you okay?" And uh, and being prepared for that person's response, right? I think oftentimes, if I'm walking down the hall and I see you in the hall, I say, "Hey, Drew, how's it going?" I'm already 5 steps beyond you, and your expected answer is, "I'm fine." And if you say anything other than "fine," it's like, oh, now what, right? So be open to how somebody responds.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point to point out, is that it's not only just the answer that is important, it's the responses that are also important too. Making sure that you sit there and you practice your listening skills, you be a good listener for somebody. And we kind of laugh about it, but it seriously helps out a lot of people, just being able to talk and not feel like they're being judged, or not feel like they're any different than somebody else, and they feel like they're being taken seriously. And I think that's a very interesting point that you bring up. We kind of uh, talk about opening up the conversation, opening up these conversations about your mental health, and talking with your friends, talking with your family, talking with people that you trust, about your mental health. And there's I feel like there's a very great divide where, for me personally, coming from a younger generation, I'm seeing the mental health talk being so widespread. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to a teacher, it doesn't matter whether you're talking to a guidance counselor, a classmate, a little brother, an older brother. Like everybody, it seems like everybody that I talk to is always willing to talk about their mental health and always willing to open up that conversation. But I feel like it's not 100%. There's still very many people who don't have those conversations, and maybe aren't 100% comfortable starting with that. And for somebody like you, who's one of the people on the front line and one of the people that is out there in the field, what are some of those barriers, do you think, for opening up that mental health talk, opening up the talk about saying,
Mhm.
my mental health matters and here's how I'm feeling? What are some of kind of the barriers in there?
Yeah, that's a great question that we need to continue to ask and explore. I think one thing is just simply definitions and understanding or misunderstanding, if you will. So oftentimes, I believe, at least anecdotally, if we're talking about, quote, mental health, people immediately think about somebody with a diagnosis of a mental illness. But if we back that up for a second, everyone has mental health. Not everyone has mental illness. So part of the answer, I think, to your question is, we were talking about it before we rang on, is sort of literacy, like just having a shared understanding of terms that we use. And sometimes we use them interchangeably, and sometimes we don't use them correctly. So I think some of the answer is that. I think some of the things that also get in our way is the concern of, well, it's not my business, or I'm just being nosy, or if I bring the topic up, what if it becomes bigger than I can handle or support? Or am I going to offend somebody, right? I think all of those can potentially get in our way. And I like to believe that in most instances, maybe not all, but in most instances, those thoughts come from a place of caring, right?
Absolutely.
But they're perhaps misguided, right? So, sometimes what can be helpful is thinking, okay, if this wasn't me being worried about somebody else, this is me being worried about me. What would I want someone to do? Like, would I want someone to ask me? Or, sometimes people think, oh, well, what would my friend tell me? Like if they were having, right, is to sort of hypothetically think, well, they would probably want me to reach out and show my concern, right? So I think that can be what can reduce some of those barriers. I think there is probably a generational thing, right? As you alluded to. Certainly when I was growing up, we either didn't talk about mental health, or if we did, especially in, say, school age, it was like, snicker, snicker, chuckle, chuckle, and, pointing the finger, and unfortunately, very disparaging remarks about people, right? I believe that is changing. I think we're making progress. I think we still have work to do. Absolutely. And those are conversations that, with younger generations and generations that are coming up now, adults have the ability to influence and shape in a positive direction, right? Whether we realize it or remember it or not all the time, kids are watching, right? Kids are watching the adults in their lives, and that's where they're doing a lot of their learning. So we can influence that, and we can shape those conversations. If you're a sports fan or not, I'm sure many people saw the recent serious drama unfolding with the Buffalo Bills player, a lot of national news conferences with the coach, right? And I think one of the things that was powerful to me was to see the conversation about mental health and wellness coming from, in that case, professional athletes, where oftentimes there's been a good deal of stigma, right? In sort of this suck it up buttercup mentality. So to see that vulnerability and to see the coach say it's a sign of strength to reach out, I think that can eventually counter some of those messages.
Absolutely. I think the as you kind of said, the literacy piece, the one piece for us is health literacy. That's a really big thing, is trying to get everybody to understand when somebody's talking about health, what are the terms that are using, what do they mean, and getting people really to understand what the person is saying rather than just nodding their head along and agreeing with it. And I think mental health is something very much along those same lines, where you have to use kind of the same terminology, and kind of really, it's very much a team oriented thing. And I think one piece that you really pointed out was this whole empathy piece of, I may think that I'm not able to help, but if I was in their situation, I would want somebody to reach out regardless if they could help or not. And whether it's just something really quick and really simple and saying, hey, like, I really don't know what I can say, but I am here for you, and I will try my hardest for you. Or whether it's just a piece of saying, you know, maybe I'm not the best piece, but I know somebody who is going to be able to help you in the best way that they can. And I think that's a really, really big piece, is having that empathy. And as you kind of said, the role models for people, it's a big thing. You know, I think it's a piece that we have to, you know, at my when I work over at the Great Escape occasionally on weekends, uh, I always tell my coworkers, because we're the supervisors, we're kind of the bosses. You know, that these people look up to us regardless of whether we want them to or not. You know, these 15, 16-year-old kids, even though we're only 10 years or 6 years, you know, at most ahead of these kids, they're going to look up to us and really kind of take what we do and make it their own thing. And, you know, that's what they see as acceptable. And I think that's always a really big piece, is setting the example for everybody, setting, you know, regardless if you're the only one, being able to say, I'm the one that started. That is always a really big, really awesome accomplishment, definitely to have. Um, and as you know, as we're kind of talking about the, you know, as you said, it's showing strength to ask for help. How do you, you know, as somebody who has, you know, somebody asked for help, and being on the other side of, okay, they asked me for help, how do I kind of navigate that conversation? How do I help somebody out when maybe I don't know all the resources and I don't know how to help?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the last comment you made. I think part of it is acknowledging, I will do the best that I can. And if you don't know the answer to something, if you don't know the resources, is to own that, right? Being genuine and authentic. And you really hit on the important points in that question. If I'm struggling with something, it doesn't have to be life altering. It doesn't have to be huge. But if I'm struggling with something and I'm just hitting a brick wall and I don't know what to do, and you and I are having a conversation, in many instances, one of the biggest things to do is just to say, well, I don't know, tell me what's going on, tell me more. And then to zip it, right? And that can be hard because people start identifying, well, I lost my job, or I'm going to lose my job, or blah, 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 all these things. And again, from a place of caring, oftentimes, no matter what our role is, we go into fix it mode. Well, have you thought about going back to college? Have you thought about this? And those might all be practical, wonderful, real solutions, right? But in the moment, if I'm at that point where I just, I'm really wrestling and you're willing to listen to me, that's what I need, right? Is just to have that person there, sometimes to not say anything, because at the end of the day, people don't want to be fixed, right? They're not problems to be solved. They just want to be heard. They want to be witnessed, if you will, right? Um, and that can be hard. It can be really hard because they're telling us what's going on. And so a natural inclination is to go into fix it mode. But the power of just sitting there and letting that person talk can be amazing. And I think the other thing that we can do is to take their lead or ask open and so what would be helpful? Is there anything particular I can do? And if you offer something, be prepared to follow through. I think those are just some key sort of, again, top of the waves things that we can all try to do.
Absolutely. I think that's a really big piece in the whole zipping it piece. I think that's awesome. That's it's honestly one of those things that not a lot of people kind of understand. But you know, it's always very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to kind of have that conversation and not, you know, give advice and do all these things. When you were describing that situation, it kind of reminded me of with my girlfriend when she gets back from work and, you know, she starts complaining about this, that, and the other. And I try to, you know, give logical, reasonable solutions to all these things. And I get I get yelled at for trying to help out, but a lot of the times, it's like you said, it's not about I want a solution, I want it to be fixed. It's mainly about I just want to be heard. I want to be know that I'm not the crazy one in this situation. And I think that's a really big piece for a lot of people is, saying I know that like I am okay to feel these things, but I need
Right.
somebody else to help validate that and validate my feelings and make me
Hmm.
feel like I'm being heard. And like you kind of said, where you know, if you ask these questions and you just kind of let them talk, they're going to guide you through those conversations. You're going to get
Hmm.
all the answers you kind of need at the end of it because they just want to get everything off their chest, and a lot of people
Hmm.
just want to feel like they're being heard. um and for some of these people who may be trying to help somebody who may be thinking about suicide, or maybe is mentally just not feeling at 100%, what kind of resources are there out here in New York State? I know one of the big ones is the
Hmm.
suicide hotline, which just recently had some really cool updates, but I'll let you go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So, and the idea and the topic of resources is important, obviously, because yes, I can help somebody in the moment, and maybe in most instances, all they need is that one person to listen, like the scenario you described, right? But there are likely to be occasions when whatever's going on with that person are beyond my capabilities and beyond my ability to help support in the moment. So knowing what's available is super important, right? You know, and it should be thought of for the listeners as a continuum, right? For some people, it might be, have you talked to your doctor about what's been going on? Have you ever talked to a mental health professional about what's going on? If you subscribe to a faith tradition, have you talked to somebody within your faith, whatever it is, right? Um, but then there are 24/7 resources, and you referenced 988. So prior to July of last year, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline was a 10-digit number, 1-800-273-8255. And if you called that number, the first thing you would get is an automated message saying, if you're a veteran, press 1. It would take you to the Centers of Excellence in Canandaigua, and you would talk to a veteran who's been trained in this work. Otherwise, you would talk to a trained crisis line worker. In most instances, somebody within, if you're calling within New York State, a center within New York State. It's a 10-digit number. If you were outside of the field of suicide prevention, it was a hard number to remember, right? So over a number of years, the federal FCC said, you know what, legislation was passed to change it to a 3-digit number. We have 911, we have 411, we have 511, right? So that number was changed to 988. What happens when you call, text, or chat is more or less the same thing than dialing the 10-digit number. And you can still dial the 10-digit number, and it's going to get you to the same resources, by the way. But one of the changes, and this is as much of a marketing thing as anything else, that we really want people to understand is it's the suicide and crisis lifeline. And so certainly if somebody is considering suicide and they're not certain if they can keep themselves safe, why, of course, that would be a great resource. But as I mentioned earlier, right, it would be much more preferable that we not wait until somebody's at that moment, right? And it might be a matter of just a few minutes or, a short period of time to help that person. We want people to call it when they're feeling in crisis. For your listeners and anyone, that's where sometimes people think to themselves, oh, I'm not in crisis. I'm having a lousy day. Things are falling apart, but I'm not in crisis. That's for somebody else. Or I'm not as bad as other people might be. And, I can understand that thinking, but we want people to think differently, right? The term crisis is self-defined. So if I'm having a lousy day, it doesn't have to have anything at all whatsoever to do with suicide. If I'm having a lousy day and I don't have anyone accessible to talk and listen to me like we just talked about, call, text, or chat 988. It's confidential, trained individuals, and they're going to do what we talked about earlier. They're going to listen. They may, depending on where things go, come up with some suggested next steps, but that's going to be driven by you. So I think, and we really do want communities to know that, right? Don't wait, call 988. Okay, get comfortable thinking about this as a resource.
Absolutely. Don't wait. Call 988. I absolutely love that. I think that's a great little catchphrase in there. You know, it's a like you said, there's a lot of, I obviously know a lot of people who have, had their fair share of mental health battles and things of that nature. And, I kind of like what you brought up where people tend to kind of invalidate their own feelings of saying, I'm not the worst. So it
Mm-hmm.
can't, like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Or, it's only just one day. I can't be feeling
Mm-hmm.
this way. Or, it's all these different things. And, it's easier to kind of deflect it. It's easier to kind of say, it's whatever. It's just one day. I'm not the worst. Blah blah blah. And it's a lot harder to admit I'm not doing well right now. For a lot of people, it's their own thoughts. So I know me. I'm a control freak and a half. I if unless I can control it, I'm not a big fan. But I'm one of those people where, like, even if I get some thoughts inside of my head, I have to sit there and by itself and I go, I'm the one, they're my thoughts. I should be controlling these. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I need to, do all those things. And it kind of took me a while to realize it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to not be okay. And that's definitely a hard lesson to learn, but I think it's definitely a lesson that more and more people are learning about as we kind of go forward. Uh, the in order for people to kind of really talk about mental health, they have to kind of understand what mental health is, how it affects people, and what are some of the signs and symptoms of somebody who may be going through a mental health crisis. And if you could kind of explain to us what are the signs and symptoms? What am I supposed to be on the lookout for for my friends? And at what point do I say, okay, no, I need to talk to them?
Yeah. Right. So I think a lot to condense it, if you will, oftentimes it's things that we've noticed that cause us to be concerned. So it might be a change in the person's actions or behaviors, something that's out of the normal for that person. Uh, so that, again, that can be actions and behaviors. That can also be communication, whether it's face to face, via text, social media, whatever the platform is. However, we're communicating. If something's changed and it makes us pause and think, well, what's that about, right? In some instances, not all, but in some instances, it could be a change in behavior or communication that literally causes us to be concerned. Like, holy cow, if the person keeps doing this, their safety is in jeopardy, right? Now, and it can be quite more subtle too. People can be creative in the ways in which their distress displays itself, right? We know that unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but adolescent males oftentimes, if they're feeling emotional distress, sometimes that comes across as aggression, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't particularly want to be around somebody who's like ready to fight at the drop of a hat and in your face and confrontational.
Yeah.
So a not unusual response in that instance might be, oh, forget you, and just to ignore it or to punish the behavior. Now, this is not to say that people shouldn't be held accountable for their actions, of course, but we might also want to consider, in particular, if this is a change in how the person typically handles things, could this be a way of communicating distress? Sometimes people just don't have the words, right? And everything I'm talking about right now certainly does not have to be connected to a diagnosable mental illness, right? It can just be connected to distress. Other things to look for are, are there changes in this person's mood state? Like, are they all over the map? One day they're happy-go-lucky, the next day they're sad or withdrawn. Are we noticing, in air quotes, mood swings, if you will, right? And again, is that a change for that person, right? Sometimes with those things that I mentioned, we also become aware that maybe somebody's experienced a loss of some sort in their life. It doesn't have to be the loss of a person. It could be a loss of financial independence or of food security or housing or whatever it might be, right? And sometimes all of those things together, right, we can notice them and they can paint a picture. Now, everything I just said might suggest that you have to know somebody really well if we're going to notice a change, right? I mean, that's a fair assumption. And yeah, that might make sense, but we can also just trust our gut. If I'm talking with somebody for the first time and I'm picking up on things, my spidey sense starts to tingle. I'm like, well, what's that about? You can trust your intuition, right? So, it's different in the idea of if we're noticing somebody that we think or believe might have a, a true mental illness, diagnosed or undiagnosed. um, there's going to be probably some changes that we've noticed. I think a really important thing to remind ourselves, though, is unless you're a trained clinician and go through a very structured process, right? We don't want to put ourselves in the position of diagnosing, right? We want to sort of meet people where they're at. What are we seeing? What are we hearing? What are we observing? And then going, rewinding the tape, so to speak, and saying, okay, I'm noticing these things. I've noticed these changes. What's going on? Are you okay? Can I help you? Right? Don't worry yourself about, is this a quote true mental illness or not, but more along the lines of, how can I help?
Absolutely. I think I love your point of saying that just because you may feel these things, it does not mean that you have a diagnosable mental illness. These are feelings that can happen. It's a part of being human. You're gonna feel things, the feelings change, and sometimes they get extreme and sometimes they're not as extreme. And it happens. It's part of being human, and it's a very frustrating thing at times. But I think that's a definitely a big thing to point out, is that it doesn't mean something is quote unquote wrong with you. It means that in this moment in time, you are not at your strongest, and we're going to try and help you get back to your strongest, get back to who we know you are. I love your point of saying that you don't have to know somebody super duper well. You don't have to be best friends with this person. You can trust your gut. You can watch this person for a couple of minutes and then be like, something is just off. There's something there that's just, it's a little bit off. And hey, are you okay? That's just that simple. I think a lot of people kind of undervalue those three words. Are you okay? I think a lot of people and a lot more situations could be a lot better if somebody just said, hey, are you okay? And I think that that's a really, really, really big piece for a lot of people. I absolutely love having you on here, and as much as I would love to continue this conversation, it's definitely one that I think we're probably gonna have to revisit more than a
Mm-hmm.
few times. I think it's a really, really big piece, I think, for not only us and our county, but I think for the state, I think nationally, I think, globally, even mental health is becoming a very big piece. And it's just in the beginning stages. While we have seen absolute massive amounts of growth, it's still just in the beginning stages, as we kind of talked about, knowing the signs, being able to accept that sometimes you're not okay, and being able to navigate those conversations is a really big piece. But as we kind of wrap up here, Gara, is there anything that we didn't get to that you would absolutely like to talk about, or maybe something that we talked about that you didn't quite get to delve into deeper, though you would have wished to?
No, and thank you for that opportunity. And I think we covered the highlights, as it were. I hope this is useful for anyone tuning in. If I had to end with some sort of message or call to action or reminder, if you will, is just piggybacking on what you said. Never underestimate the power and the impact that you can have by connecting with somebody, right? Uh, it could be literally a game changer simply by being genuine and authentic and showing an interest in somebody's life. It doesn't have to be about suicide prevention. It doesn't have to be about mental illness. But I think that genuine, authentic connection is something that can be a game changer.
Absolutely. As you said earlier, don't wait, call 988. Obviously the new suicide hotline changes. If you at any point in time are feeling like you are having a mental health crisis, or like we said, saying you're having a lousy day or anything like that, please do not hesitate. Please call 988. Thank you guys so much. Obviously, thank you so much, Garrett, for coming on here. I'm your host, Drew Crawford. This was the Just for the Health of It podcast. Make sure to be safe, be healthy, and we'll see you all next time.